Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Media of Innovation at Point Park University. I'm Nicole Capelco.
And I'm Colton Tobias, and we welcome you to tonight's town hall for the candidates running for Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District. This district covers downtown Pittsburgh and some surrounding areas which are new due to redistricting a few weeks ago, which include the Mon Valley and some parts of Westmoreland County.
We will have 5 Democrats participating tonight in our event, each seeking to win the primary on May 17th and then move on to the general election in November. That race will determine who will take over the Democratic spot that Mike Doyle had since 1995. We invited the only registered Republican to join us, whose name is also Mike Doyle, and he did not respond. So now let's take a moment and meet the candidates.
So we are going to get started with candidate number 1, and the first 2 candidates are the 2 gentlemen that are joining us in person at the Center for Media Innovation. So our first candidate holds 2 degrees from Point Park, actually, a Master of Business Administration and a Master's of Science and Criminology. He has been involved in politics since his early days as a high school student and has been the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania College Access Program for 22 years, which encourages low-income high school students to attend college. Everybody, please give a warm round of applause for Jeff Woodard.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next up, we have a Garfield activist who grew up on the north side and ran for Pittsburgh mayor in 2021. Everyone, please give it up for William Parker.
And now we are going to go to the 3 candidates that have joined us through Zoom tonight. So this man already has experience in Washington as a legislative assistant to former Pennsylvania Senator Arlen Specter. As a lawyer, he has received endorsements from incumbent Congressman Mike Doyle and former Mayor of Pittsburgh Bill Peduto. As mentioned, he could not join us in Pittsburgh tonight, but please welcome Steve Irwin, who is joining us from Philadelphia.
For our next candidate, he is a constitutional law professor at the University of Pittsburgh looking to serve the Constitution in Washington. He is also running for a seat for the 2nd time. He ran unsuccessfully against Congressman Doyle in the Democratic primaries in 2020. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Jerry Dickinson.
And finally, our last candidate is the state representative from Braddock. In her bid to serve in Congress, she has received support from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, as well as Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey. She cannot make it to the CMI tonight, but we are glad she is joining us from Harrisburg, where the legislature is in session. Please give a warm round of applause for Summer Lee.
Just to go over some rules for tonight, just as a reminder to everyone, this event is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. So let's go over the rules for our audience and our candidates. For our audience members, we ask that you not applaud or make any noise or gestures at any point during this event. There will be a time at the conclusion of the town hall for applause.
And candidates, here are the rules for tonight's town hall. We will have a 75-minute discussion on where you all stand from a variety of federal topics facing the United States today. We will start in the order chosen by random earlier this evening. Then we will rotate through the order on who will answer the next question first. You will have 60 seconds to respond, and if you need a refresher on how much time you have, there is a clock right in front of you over in the back there on that television. When one candidate is speaking, we do ask the other candidates to be respectful and not interrupt with their responses. You are allowed rebuttals and to respond to another candidate when it is your turn, but it must be during the 60-second response. We will allow extra time unless you are finishing a sentence at the end of your turn, and we will give you a 10-second warning for each question, and we will also have final statements, 2 minutes each, which will begin at 7:55. That is when all the questions will stop. So, are we all ready to go?
Yes.
All right, so let's get started. And our first topic is going to go to Mr. Woodard, and it will be on student loan debt. So President Biden has extended the student loan pause once again to August 31st. This question hits close to many of us students here at Point Park University. So do you support or oppose aiding people with student debt to pay off their loans? Why or why not? And if so, how? And Mr. Woodard, you are on the board first.
Yes, indeed. I believe that the majority of the people that will be representing in my district will agree with me also. having myself attended Point Park University and have a ton of debt from from college myself, I definitely support this.
Alrighty, so our next is Mr. Parker.
Yes, I definitely support it. I think it's the right thing to do.
Anything else you would like to elaborate on that?
No.
All right, so Mr. Irwin, you are next.
Thank you. I definitely support relief for student debt. I had loans myself to go through school, college and law school. They were extensive, but nowhere near as extensive as they are for your students today. I believe that one of the things we need to do is provide when I'm in Congress, I will introduce legislation to provide a tax credit whereby you can deduct the cost of loans that you take to go through school and from income that you earn subsequently to your graduation. It makes sense because you can do that now if you're in a job and you're getting education to advance. So why not do it when you're in school? Because you're certainly taking those courses so you can put you in a position to provide for yourself and your family. I also want to introduce legislation that requires schools to provide some transparency about the return on the investment for different degrees and different investments. And finally, I want to make sure that we change interest so that you can restructure your loans and take advantage when interest rates are lower, which you cannot do right now.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Mr. Dickinson, you are next.
Support what the Biden administration has done recently with another executive order to extend the student debt relief. That being said, when I'm in Congress, I do plan on joining a number of congresspersons in the Democratic Party in seeking to cancel student debt. We've gone now over 2 years with student loans being deferred and being discontinued in some cases, and we see the benefits of that. There are far too many Americans right now, far too many young people in this country who are shackled from upward mobility. They can't access and get and own a home. They can't buy a car. They can't get access to other forms of credit, in large part due to that debt, and that is having a detrimental impact on our economy, and this may be the next bubble that bursts. And so as a result of that, we need to cancel student debt, relieve millions of people from the debt that they now have, and start over. And in the meantime, before we get to that piece of legislation that would wipe it away, or an executive order from President Biden to wipe it away, we need to lower the interest rates and provide other extended relief for borrowers as well. I'm someone who has student debt as well, and I teach a lot of law students at the university.
Now move on. I apologize for interrupting. Ms. Lee, you are next.
Thank you. I am a strong proponent of canceling student loan debt. I also have an exorbitant amount of student loan debt that I incurred while coming from the Mon Valley and being a first-generation college student and going on to law school. We know that this has wreaked havoc on generations now of Americans, and it has kept us from so many fulfilling parts of life and milestones. We've seen throughout the last 2 years that when we don't pay it, like it was said, it frees up so much. I believe that this was a campaign promise, and this is something we have to fight for. Furthermore, I believe that America must join every other industrialized country in the world in being a country that provides free college, pre-K and through college for all students in America.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question is something that has affected us all tremendously: inflation. Prices for everything seem to be going up. Point Park University's student newspaper, The Globe, recently ran a story about commuter students choosing between paying for gasoline and making other spending choices. The university also runs a free pantry for students who cannot afford to purchase food. What steps, if any, do you believe the federal government should take to address inflation? Starting off with Ms. Summerlee.
The federal government must address the fact that we have not raised the wage since 2007, right? Pennsylvania is still stagnant at $7.25 an hour as the minimum wage. The minimum wage was never supposed to be unlivable, right? It's supposed to be the baseline for workers to have the basic needs that they need, their basic needs met, right? Housing, food, transportation. That's not the case right now. But as corporations make record profits right now, we're just transferring those costs onto everyday consumers. We're transferring those to the most marginalized populations and communities and our workers who are overworked and are not working less. They are working more hours and getting less out of them. So I think that as we talk about inflation, it's important to talk about who is really profiting and who is benefiting and who's being left behind. We absolutely can have a living wage, which right now we're well past a fight for 15. We need a living wage, and we also need unions for all.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Woodard.
Number one topic also with me dealing with them. I believe right now with Pennsylvania still setting that $7.25 an hour, as she stated, is something that we have to raise up to $15 an hour. And again, that is something that's going to help the young people in paying for their education and for living. I come from a family of 21 children, 11 girls, 10 boys. Imagine my family if my mom and dad had to live off of $7.25 an hour to raise all 21 of us. So yes, this is something that I believe that the federal government should step in and take handle of and work on.
Mr. Parker, same to you.
You know, there's a lot of people out here that like to take advantage of others, and this is the situation that we're in with this inflation. You know, we have other foreign countries who are at war, and this is what happens when there's a war. Prices run up, gas price gouging at our grocery stores, inflation, the cost. This is where the people who prey on a little guy come in. This is where they make their money. And we need someone like myself who will step up to them and say, enough is enough. So basically, I think that we can also put a better track on it, use some type of tech to track who's really profiting from this inflation the most, so we could let the people know and try to curb them from profiting
Mr. Parker,
the most.
you have 10 seconds.
And also, with this last 10 seconds, I would like Summer Lee, Steve Irwin, and Jerry Dickinson to at least retweet this form right here on their social networks. They didn't show up, and they didn't even allow their customers, they didn't even allow their fans to know
Mr.
about
Parker,
this
you
event.
are, my apologies for the interruption, but you're out of time.
I know. I'm going to run over sometimes. I need to let y'all know that.
Next, moving on to Mr. Irwin.
So clearly inflation is choking us, and in our food prices, at the gas pump, in our rentals and our rents, our housing, and it's got to change. I have experience. I was one of the chief regulators in the United States for securities, and I know the financial structure. There are many tools that we have in Washington to keep interest rates low that will help prevent inflation from getting out of control. But we also need to start making things in this country so we can control supply chain, which will really help to keep prices down. We also need to make sure that our federal agencies that look out for price gouging will do all they can to stop that kind of thing, as Mr. Parker pointed out. So clearly inflation is a problem. We have geopolitical issues that are going on that are affecting it. It's going to get worse. We have to increase wages, and we have to make sure we keep inflation in check.
And lastly, Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, inflation right now is a major issue. It's affecting everyone in the United States and across the world, in large part due to geopolitical issues regarding Russia and Ukraine. And this is an issue that hits close to home. My wife and I, we have 2 daughters, and we are just getting by, right? We have to figure out how we're going to pay for increased prices on gas versus purchasing diapers for our daughters. And that's a squeeze that a lot of Americans are dealing with right now. So I feel it. Many people feel it. There's a number of things that can be done right now. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, can use some of its power to actually use new forms of energy to decrease the amount of gas and energy that's being used now that is gouging a lot of Americans at the gas pump. That's very important. Executive orders to provide for more subsidies for Americans who are struggling just to get by with their payments. Rent reduction is also very important because rising rents are part of that inflation. And then food. Simple access to grocery that's affordable is a problem. We need
Mr.
to have
please complete your sentence.
subsidies that are available through the federal government to help families get by during this very difficult time period. And I look forward to being in Congress and
Mr. Dickinson, please, we are sorry to interrupt, but we are out of time. We have to move on. So our next question will go to the opioid epidemic. Excuse me. So President Biden has declared a national emergency. What actions, if any, do you believe Congress should take on this issue? And Mr. Dickinson, we are going to go back to you.
The opioid epidemic is ravaging communities all across the United States. My family is a victim of the opioid crisis. We lost a foster brother, about 4 years ago from fentanyl overdose here in Pittsburgh, and it's affecting a lot of folks. And as a result of that, we need to do a whole lot more to provide resources to educate communities about the importance of these street drugs that are actually making their way into communities. We also need to have educational opportunities and training within our communities to talk more about the problems that are there. But also we need to go after major pharmaceutical companies that are now allowing these types of substances to get into the market, which are then affecting millions of people. And when I'm in Congress, regulations that would be imposed at the state and local level on businesses and pharmaceutical companies is going to be imperative for moving forward with that. Thank you.
All right, and Ms. Lee, we are going to go to you next. Ms. Lee, you are muted on your microphone. You have to mute your microphone. Ms. Lee, can you give a thumbs up if you're able to hear us? We cannot come back to you if you would like to figure it out. Thank you. Thank you. We apologize for that, and we'll go to Mr. Woodard. You're up next on this.
The opioid crisis is definitely something that I agree upon. I've lost in the past several students from Pennsylvania College Access Program, our nonprofit, in which they passed from the opioids. In addition to that, I lost my better half, shall I say, 2 years ago to this opioid crisis. So therefore, this is something that I believe that we have a major problem throughout the entire United States, here in Pittsburgh, here in Allegheny County, and here in the district. So this is a topic that touches me personally.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Woodard. Mr. Parker, you're up next.
Thank you. I believe we do have to go after the pharmaceutical companies. We have to also go after some of these doctors who are abusing prescriptions that they're giving out to people. People are, it's unfortunate that people fall on hard times, once again, just like inflation. And there's people who swoop right in and take advantage of them and make $1 off them. Too often, so many times people are left feeling hopeless. And I think that as we also try to tackle the opioid crisis, we also have to attack what's the core. What does this all center around? And I think that once we do that, then we'll be able to put a plan together because sometimes legislation, it takes too long. And
10 seconds.
And people want to, they want to shift this right now. They want to curve it, and they want to help people. I think that we need to address the issue at hand, which is people being left out.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, were you able to join us again?
Yes, I'm sorry. I went to hit unmute and I X'd out of the Zoom. This is the pain of doing things remotely. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you. And Ms. Lee, would you like to go on this topic?
Yeah. Yes, I'm truly echoing the sentiment of my fellow candidates here. This is a crisis that we've been dealing with locally as well as nationally, right? And it's something that I believe has impacted communities and families, every community and family in some way. I know that tackling an issue of this magnitude is one that isn't just going to be at the federal level. Of course, it's not just something that's going to be at the local level, but it's going to be something that's going to take a concerted effort at every level of government and with our social programming also, right? This is access to healthcare and mental health care. We're talking about, yes, holding pharmaceutical companies accountable. We're also talking about creating access and education, right? Equipping folks and first responders to be able to apply Narcan and to have that available in spaces to ensure that we have safe needle exchanges. These are all initiatives that I've seen and that I know folks who are in advocacy around this have been working on, but it takes obviously a lot more.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And finally, Mr. Irwin.
This problem is particularly acute in this district, in this 12th Congressional District, because we have the Mon Valley, which has been abandoned, and communities are really struggling, and people are getting into a lot of trouble, and the epidemic is very prevalent there. Number one, we can decriminalize marijuana so that people are able to get the help they need when they're really in pain, and they don't have to resort to opioids, which are so addictive. Number two, we have to recognize that, marijuana is not legalized, on the federal level. We need to do that. Number two, we have to recognize that we have a mental health crisis in this country and provide the support that people need to deal with the mental challenges that they have, so they don't have to resort to such extreme measures as these kinds of drugs. We have to keep people in school and end exclusionary discipline that affects, unfortunately, people of color, students of color more than any others. And so they can stay in school and get good jobs and provide for their families. And we've got to fix the economy so people can have a livable wage and lead rewarding lives.
Please wrap up your sentence.
It's a very serious problem.
That is all the time you have, Mr. Irwin.
Oh, and just for the record, for our timers, there is a little delay in the time with our folks who are on Zoom. So that's...
All right. Moving on to the next question is a topic that hits close to home here. As we all know, Pittsburgh is the city of bridges, and the Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed in January on the very day that President Biden visited the city to talk about infrastructure spending. Congress has already approved a major influx of spending in this area. What would you do as a member of Congress to ensure that money funds the right projects, and what else should the federal government do to prevent the next major infrastructure failure? Starting off with Mr. Irwin.
Yes, so infrastructure is a major problem here because our region was built 120 years ago and it's crumbling. We know that from Fern Hollow, but there are 150 other bridges and roads just like it in this region. When I worked in the U.S. Senate for 5 years, I was responsible for infrastructure, and I was able to get major infrastructure projects through, just like the LRT to the South Hills, repairing bridges and other roads. I was our representative to the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, which is in charge of infrastructure for the 10-county region. I know how to get these things done. I did it as a lawyer representing contractors and architects and engineers building roads and bridges. So I'm going to make sure that Pittsburgh gets its fair share of these infrastructure funds. I know how to get them out of appropriations, out of the departments. I've done it before. I'll do it again when I get to Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. So, sorry, Nicole, you go ahead.
Thank you. Next, Jerry Dickinson.
Yes, infrastructure is incredibly important. The Fern Hollow Bridge, my wife and two daughters and I, we used to walk underneath of it. We used to drive across it all the time, and it could have been anyone in the city that was hurt or injured or killed by that disaster. And as a result, we know that we need the federal government to play a significant role in repairing our bridges and our roads. And with the infrastructure package, which I would have voted for and would have supported, I think that that monies that's coming to Pennsylvania can be used and distributed for union-paying jobs, for contractors to come in, for women minority-owned businesses to actually play a role in the money that is coming into the district to ensure that we have a safe environment. As a constitutional law professor who understands the ins and outs of authorizations and appropriations of this money, I'm well equipped to go into Congress on day one in order to do that. And I think it's important that the next representative is someone who would have supported and is someone who can doll out that money and ensure it gets to the right places here in Pittsburgh to help our region. So, thank you.
Thank you. Summerlee, you're next.
So infrastructure is a problem that we have nationally, right? We're chronically underfunding our national infrastructure, and Pittsburgh has unfortunately become the poster child for this. It's important to recognize that as the Fern Hollow Bridge was a catastrophe that could have been worse, and we're grateful that it was not. As has been mentioned, right? Allegheny County has thousands of bridges, and only about 300 of them are even in good condition. The infrastructure bill was a good starting point, but it is the floor, not the ceiling. It was a compromise bill, and the reality is that it would only be able to really address about less than 5% of our bridges in this region. As a congressperson, we need somebody who's going to go back and fight for the whole pie, right? There are more dollars that we must invest in this, right? As we look at increasing weather events, right? As we're looking at climate change, we know that these infrastructure needs are only going to get worse. It is cheaper to fix a bridge and to weatherize it than it is to rebuild it. And we need folks who will fight for those investments on the front end.
Thank you. Mr. Woodard?
As far as the infrastructure goes, as we all know, Pittsburgh is the city of bridges, and these bridges have been around for a long time. Therefore, members of the House of Representatives and the Pennsylvania Senate, there's lots of money already been invested into the state from the federal government, and the money is sitting there in Harrisburg, but we need that money distributed to this area and to this region at the present time. There's billions of dollars of surplus money left over from the pandemic. If we take that money that's already there and start investing into the community here, I believe we'll be all right. But at the same time, we still need the money from Washington, D.C. Therefore, again, the president was here, he visited, he's seen, he put money towards it, and we want to continue to get that money flowing back to the district, and I believe I am your candidate to make sure that happens.
Parker?
Okay, $1.7 trillion is a lot of money, and that's what I'm here for. I want to make sure that this money is allocated equally and equitably. This Congress seat, to me, it's about what can be done in these next 2 years. This Congress seat holds a term limit. So I want to come in and I want to take full advantage of this funding opportunity that's available to us right now. There's no legislation that needs to be passed anymore. This money is available. And I want to see it go to people of color. As we travel through in and out the city, every time we approach a construction site, we never see any black people operating heavy machinery. Only time we see them out there is if they're like flaggers or something like that. That has got to change. We need
Mr. Parker, you have 10
black
seconds.
operators. We need to certify them, and we need to give them this funding so they could get up and get going and help us rebuild this city together.
Thank you very much. So our next topic is going to go to something that was already mentioned, and I think the biggest conflict facing our world today, which is the war in Ukraine. So since Russia started its unprovoked attack on Ukraine on February 24th, thousands of civilians have been killed and thousands of civilians have also been fleeing from Ukraine to places around the world. And the United States has responded with sanctions on Russia as well as funding and providing limited weapons for Ukraine. So what additional steps, if any, do you believe the United States should take on this war? Mr. Parker, we're going to start with you.
This is a touchy topic. My thoughts and my prayers go out to those in Ukraine. This war is a tragedy. I don't think war is the answer. I never do. I think that America could have offered them as much assistance as possible without overstepping their boundaries to really pull us into something that necessarily that we don't feel like we need to be in. I would look over any legislation if any is put forward and see where we would stand on that. And, if I deem that it's fit, I will vote for it. But, it's a touchy topic, and, my prayers go out to those who lost loved ones.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. And now we are going to go to Mr. Irwin. Mr. Irwin, your mic is muted.
This region has many people from Ukraine, our region here, and this is what's happened. And Putin's invasion of Ukraine was just of a sovereign nation, just was unconscionable. And President Biden was right to go in and support NATO and gather the countries of the world to respond promptly and swiftly to Putin and to try to stop him. The Ukrainians are fighting on their own. We need to give them all the weapons they need to protect themselves. The horrific scenes we're seeing are just horrible. I've been working very hard with people in this community who have gathered in the Ukrainian community and our refugee experts in this region to bring Ukrainian families into safety and maybe to Pittsburgh to resettle them if we have to. That's the kind of leadership that I'll bring when I'm in Congress, to bring together those people who can make a difference and support the president in what he's done to try to make sure that we're a leader in the world and have strong relationships with NATO.
Thank you so much, Mr. Irwin. And Mr. Dickinson, you are up next. And can we please ask who is joining you right now?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, the war in Ukraine right now is a tragedy, and my wife and I We saw this when we were watching television the other day. We noticed that there are women, children, and families that are affected by this in Ukraine. We watched in horror to see all that happening, and we have 2 children of our own. One of them is right here on my lap, and as a result, there's a lot that still needs to be done. The United States needs to tighten sanctions, economic sanctions against Russia, to continue to cripple its economy. The other thing that the United States needs to continue to do is open up its borders for refugees, humanitarian aid that needs to be provided. We need to have more than 100,000 that come to the United States as a result of that. We also need to drive a wedge between China and Russia as a result of this ordeal, so that authoritarian regimes do not start to consolidate power to continue to invade other countries. And then lastly, I think the Biden administration has done a fantastic job bringing the EU together, and also getting Finland to now consider going into NATO, to expand NATO and have a blockade across that Eastern European border to provide national security across the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. And Ms. Lee, we are going to go to you next.
Yeah. This war in Ukraine has been horrific, of course, and heart-wrenching, right? As war often is. And this is a situation that is tenuous and one that can escalate to proportions that we've not seen in decades, of course. I think it's important that we can continue our line of diplomacy, right? As much as we can, we need to avoid escalating with Russia, escalating into a nuclear war, but we also have to be sure and be clear about our support for Ukraine and Ukrainians. Of course, as we know, refugees are being created from this crisis, and there are going to be people who are seeking refuge here in the United States, and this region has been mentioned as one that we have seen. But the refugee resettlement program has been desecrated by Trump. And it's great that the Biden administration is looking to accept 100,000 people, but we don't have right now the capacity through the paperwork and the programming, and we have to invest in fixing that program so that we can welcome those folks here as we go throughout this crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and we are going to conclude with Mr. Woodard.
Yes, I believe with the NATO right now working with Ukraine and the president, I believe he's doing a fine job what he's doing at the present time, not involving us in becoming a part of the war itself, but again, working with NATO and working with the United Nations. Again, also they should take a look at war crimes against Putin, and also economic sanctions, I believe, are working at the present time. And I believe that at the same time, I don't want the United States to go into war with Putin.
Moving on to our next question, has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still in this today. What lessons have we learned from this, and what is a federal response, and what steps should Congress take to prevent another major outbreak? Starting off with Mr. Woodard.
At the present time, as you may see, we're at the same time we're seeing right now in Philadelphia. I don't know if you've seen the news or not, where they're stating that the virus is coming back, but on a different level. And we're starting to see that the city there have ordered everyone to start wearing masks again. I believe on the federal level and everything, they should leave that to the states. It is the state's duty and responsibility to know what's best in their own states, and that we should not federalize this pandemic.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Parker.
COVID has really opened all of our eyes. It's put us in a position of uncertainty. And but when tragedy strikes, there presents an opportunity for ideas, for solutions, for us to prevent the next thing to come. And I think, that we could just bring ideas from this. I would like to gather as many ideas as possible from what we have learned collectively. And I would like to, use some COVID money to, invest in entrepreneurs and invest in inventors who have these creative ideas to help us protect ourselves from the virus, or help us provide...
Mr. Parker, you have 10 seconds.
Help us provide services to people who can't make it out the house to get groceries or other essential items.
Mr. Irwin.
We were not prepared for the pandemic, but we should have been. We knew it was coming. Government really failed us, and frankly, it was one of the reasons that prompted me to look to run for office. We have to be prepared next time so we can teach our kids right away. We've got to have the broadband in place. We've got to have everybody in their homes have really solid so they can learn from home. We have to make sure that people can work easily. I worked hard during that time to make sure essential businesses were open and still operating. We have to get the supply chain in place so we're not dependent on other countries. When I'm in Congress, I was co-chair of the Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative. We started, and I'm continuing to champion a national patient and provider safety authority that will end avoidable medical error, both for providers on the front lines and patients. A lot of that happened during the pandemic. A lot of people died who didn't have to die, and we need to fix that. And I think my time's up.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, the pandemic ravaged our economy. It opened up the hood of the car, and we saw a lot of the inequities that we have in our current economy as a result of the pandemic and the lack of oversight with regards to our public health system. And so a lot of issues still need to be resolved. One is we need to get to a vaccine for children. We have a 4.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old who do not have a vaccine at this point. And as a result, we have to be very cautious about how they are operating in daycare, for example, and how daycares are actually following CDC guidelines. That's very problematic. I'm a teacher at the University of Pittsburgh, and we're very much cognizant of that the pandemic could still continue to spread as a result of this. And the other thing that has come up quite a bit as a result of the pandemic is evictions. Last summer, the eviction moratorium, which halted evictions, expired. And as a result, as a civil rights lawyer, I took on a huge caseload of representing tenants who were being evicted from their homes because they couldn't pay rent. And I'm still representing those tenants even today, even this week. And so we have a lot of work to do. The federal government has a role to play in this intervention. And I expect to be, when I'm in Congress, to be shepherding some of these policies to get us on the other side once this pandemic begins to recede. Thank you.
Lastly, Summerlee.
This pandemic and the government's response to it has exposed the pre-existing inequities that create the pre-existing conditions that we saw that ravaged disproportionately, of course, Black and Brown communities, our disabled neighbors and family members. I think that our federal response to it has been abysmal, and so too has our state response. I think that one of the important takeaways that our federal government must do is we must move towards a Medicare for all system. We are 2 years into a pandemic, and we still have folks who are reliant upon their employer-based healthcare system, people who could not afford to take off from work and did not have insurance to stay home sick. We need workers' rights and protections, unions, labor unions. We need to pass the PRO Act because we need our workers to be empowered. We had essential workers who were risking their lives without hazard pay or paid family leave. I, as a legislator, introduced the legislation at the state level that got us our eviction moratorium and advocated directly to the governor for it. We have to talk about housing justice throughout this and our transportation systems. All of these things are interconnected, and they have all been exposed throughout this pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And our next question is something that I think hits home to a lot of people in this room, which is the media. So technology continues to disrupt the journalism industry. That means fewer jobs for young journalists and less local news for many Americans. In the original Build Back Better legislation, it included tax credits for local news outlets. What, if anything, should Congress do to support local journalism? And also, as a personal question, I think we're curious to see where the five of you get your news. And Ms. Lee, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that honestly has not come up for me in this conversation. I actually am too, funny enough, would have been a student journalist, but for the fact that I went to law school. And I look at the ways in which journalism has shifted and changed and the dangers that we see through social media and our big tech industries and the need to regulate them, the ways in which folks who are not quite an actual journalist are proliferating our news circuits. And I see that as a tremendous problem that we have in regulating social media and the lack of ability to do that when it comes to journalism. I would actually have to think and look more into that question because it's not one that I think that I'm quite prepared for. But as to where I get my news from, I try to get it from a diversity of sources, right? Social media, of course, but I get it from local media, the Post-Gazette, our local news, national news, CNN, Politico, The Hill. There are so many different diverse sources that I attempt to get my news from so that we can keep fresh perspectives at the forefront.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. So, Mr. Woodard, you're up next.
Build Back Better. Well, again, For me, I'm also big time into the news, so I watch all the news channels. That's like my number one thing everyone tell you. You come into my house and anywhere in my office, you have all 3 different channels on watching the news, local, national, etc. I believe that money should be funded to the news media because that's the number one thing that we have to let people know what's going on in the community, whether it's inside the colleges, whether it's inside the high schools, or whether it's as a nation with the local stations that we have in the national nation. So therefore, I'm in support of any money that can be provided to help out the news outlets.
Mr. Parker?
Some funding should go towards independent journalists. You know, there's too many partisan journalism going on, too much partisan journalism going on nowadays. They're not giving you the full story. They're not telling you about all the candidates. They're not interviewing all the candidates. And that has to be the number one thing, an independent outlet of news source that doesn't pull you either way, left or right, but just keeps neutral and gives you everything that you need to know from a standpoint, all around standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Irwin, you're up next.
So I was editor of my high school paper and my editor of my college paper, and journalism to me is very close to home. I believe that the journalism is the fourth estate. It's an co-equal branch of government, and we require it to be able to give people the information they need so they can vote, make informed votes and informed decisions in their lives. I also think that the fact that we have much out there that's just not reliable, anyone can get out and be a source of information and be taken as reliable, is what's preventing us from getting things done and moving this country forward, making progress, because we're not operating with a common set of facts. And if we don't have the common set of facts, we can't fix the same problems. So my son happens to be also a broadcaster at the local level. He would benefit from that, but that's not why I would supporting local journalism, good journalism, a reliable journalism with facts checked, sources double checked, and make sure that we all can
that is your time.
Make good decisions based on good facts.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. So, Mr. Dickinson, you will lead us off in our last.
Yes, the media and journalism, it really is the bedrock of our First Amendment rights, and being able to exercise them, freedom of information, freedom of expression. And so it's very important that Congress plays a very strong role in protecting journalists and the media. And that includes providing grants from the federal government down to the local level to provide for internships for local outlets, independent outlets, to help to encourage and cultivate the media at the local level and the national level. The other thing I'm concerned about increasingly since the Trump era is an uptick in violence against journalists and against the media by people who believe that the media is fake news. And I do think the DOJ and the U.S. attorneys' offices across the United States need to take a harder stance on prosecuting those who have violated the constitutional rights of journalists. We've seen this on the campaign trail of Donald Trump, journalists actually being harmed as a result of that, and that trickles down at the local level. So we need to be cognizant of that and take more aggressive action to stop that from happening. And also the conglomeration of media is a problem. We need to have more independent outlets, and Congress can play a role in breaking up some of that massive media outlet that we currently have, and have more options and freedom of expression and ideas. And I think that's a very important role for Congress to play. So thank you.
Moving on to our next question, deals with diversity in society. The 2020 death of George Floyd was at the hands of police officers. This spiraled a national discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What would you do as a member of Congress to ensure fairness in social justice, particularly when it comes to law enforcement? We're going to start with Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, as a civil rights lawyer in the post-George Floyd era, and also prior to that, I've been someone who's been on the front lines protesting and engaging in activism. I think that's incredibly important for moving the needle on legislation. And as a civil rights lawyer, I also was the lead counsel with my law students, assisting local activist groups and actually attempting to change the Independent Police Review Board here in Pittsburgh into a democratically elected police review board. We conducted all the legal work and attempted to get it up on a referendum for a vote in last November. And so these are the things that I'm doing on the ground, and obviously I'd be someone who would do that when I'm in Congress. Congress needs to ban qualified immunity so that law enforcement officers do not and cannot escape liability. And we also need to demilitarize the police and shift some funds away to social services and other services across localities for affordable housing and healthcare purposes. That's extremely important, and I look forward to doing that when I'm in Congress. So thank you.
Ms. Lee, your response?
Yes. First of all, I want to say that diversity, inclusion, and equity can't be a trend or a fad, right? Something that we do to check a box. It's important that we think about the ways in which we need diversity of perspective and experience, racial backgrounds, and all of our, at every level of government and business and nonprofits. And when we see that, we get some of the outcomes that we had as a legislator right now and concurrently as an organizer. I was one of the leads on our police accountability slate of legislation, right? Helping to organize active actions and movement work on the ground, while at the same time co-governing with those same folks to build out legislation around use of force, police use of force, and addressing police violence and special prosecutors, qualified immunity. And I'm proud of the actions that we were able to take because of having that diversity of perspective, having a Black woman in office who was impacted by police violence, to now take that experience and go into office and move differently to get legislation passed. From that, we got our first a unique police accountability list registry that would have saved lives and kept police officers from being able to move from department to department. We need that sort of insight. That's why we need Black representatives and brown ones.
Mr. Woodard?
Having a background in criminal justice, this is one of the topics that affect me also. And I'm not a part of defund the police. I believe we should educate the police and also have money and drawn towards assisting the police and making sure that they're educated when they go out into the community and work with the community. I believe also in police accountability. I don't believe that there should be an officer in one force and then he commits a crime or get into trouble and then he can leave that precinct and go to another city, another town. I believe there should be a registry for all police officers across the entire United States. If they commit a crime, get into trouble, and then they should be going to the National Registry so that we know their background no matter where they go.
Mr. Parker, you're next.
I'm not sure how many times diversity is going to be brought up, so I'm going to let y'all know. Black women put me on this ballot. Black women put me on this ballot. And that's who I'm standing up for. That's who I'm championing for. I want to make sure that people are included. People from all races, all colors, all genders. You know, it's important. And that's why I also believe that the next person who is elected to this seat should be a person of color. You know, of course I'm going to root for myself, but if not, you know, we've had Mike Doyle in this position for the last, umpteen times, so many years. It's time for something new. It really is. As I look across this board, it's time for something new. Let's just give it a chance. It's only 2 years. If it doesn't work, vote for Steve Irwin in the next 2 years. But as far as with police, I think that we should hire local. We should increase. We should increase the people on the force who are being hired from you know, African Americans, Black, brown people. Should be more of them on the force.
Mr. Irwin?
Yeah, so we have to, there's so many things we need to do. I started my career by focusing on disparity in sentencing and ending indeterminate sentencing, which resulted in widely disparate sentences for people of color and people who are not. And we narrowed it, but we still have to work on alleviating disparities in sentencing. One way to do that is we can pay our public defenders more so that people who are facing trials have better representation and have better outcomes. We also need to, as chair of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in Pennsylvania, we've worked at ending exclusionary discipline that has a disproportionate impact on students of color, people who are disabled, and LGBTQ youth. And we need to get police out of schools and work toward more restorative solutions. And we have to reimagine policing. So we pay our police more, because if we pay them more, we're going to get better police, and police should be doing what they do best, and have others who have to deal with the other challenges there who are better trained to do that, address those.
Thank you.
And our next topic of discussion is abortion, something that has been in the news recently as well. So as the Supreme Court considers giving more say to the states for control over abortion laws, what steps, if any, would you take as a member of Congress to balance a woman's right to choose, but at the same time focus on the concerns of those who want to protect the life of an unborn child? And Mr. Irwin, we're going to start with you. Mr. Irwin, your microphone is muted.
I'm sorry, I apologize. This is an assault on women that started in Oklahoma and Texas, and it's coming to Pennsylvania if it hasn't already. Women should control their bodies. They have a right to choose whether they want to have a family. They have to have reproductive freedom. And I in Congress would support establishing, codifying Roe versus Wade. Not everyone's happy, but it's a careful balance that we've had over many years. And we need to make sure that that's the law, and the Supreme Court's focus on this, because it's not going in a good direction.
Mr. Irwin, Mr. Dickinson, you're next.
Yes, currently there's an attack on women's rights and abortion rights and all across the United States right now. And we are facing a situation where the Supreme Court may overturn Roe v. Wade coming this summer. And we've never had a long-established fundamental right, like the right to abortion, overturned or reversed. It's never happened before, and it's dangerous. And so when I'm in Congress, there's a number of things that I plan to do. One is to join my colleagues in attempting to codify a statutory right to abortion under federal law. That's very important. Number two, if Congress cannot do that, I would advocate for the Biden administration to provide lease federal land for abortion providers so that they won't be subjected to state laws that are abortion restrictive. That's very important as well. We also need to be able to provide abortion resources under Medicaid. Currently, under Pennsylvania law, we do not have that for Medicaid. You don't have access to abortion resources. That's problematic. And then I'd like to also see the DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's offices go after states who are engaging in restrictive abortion laws and take them to court and federal court in order to uphold that right. So a lot of things that need to be done, and as a constitutional law professor, I teach this issue in constitutional law every year, and I'm versed in it, and I'm looking forward to getting into Congress and making this change. Thank you.
Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee, you need to unmute your microphone.
I didn't hear you say my name in the first place. I apologize.
My apologies.
So abortion, reproductive justice is one of those issues that attacks, and to be very clear, they're not just attacking the right of a woman to choose. They are criminalizing women and birthing people. They are attacking and perpetuating poverty. And these are the identities of people who are least likely to occupy the halls of power. So I wanted to remark on that because it's important that we recognize who is being attacked and what we're doing against it, right? I would absolutely wholeheartedly support a woman's right to choose and reproductive health and justice. This is a healthcare right, and we must preserve it and making sure that all folks have healthcare in this country. But also I want to talk about the fact that the maternal mortality rate in this country is higher than it is in other industrialized countries, which means that we have in this country an inability to keep Black women alive, yet we have legislators who want to say that they must give birth. That is a problem that we have to address in this country. As we see and face Roe maybe going to fall, we also have to talk about expanding the Supreme Court, eliminating lifetime tenure, and eliminating the filibuster so that we can actually pass laws that will codify Roe v. Wade.
Mr. Warder?
My basic feeling on this one is going to leave it with Roe versus Wade, leave that with the Supreme Court and let them make their decisions on that case. At the present time, codifying, I believe, is like one of the issues that may be brought up in Congress, and we have to wait on that one. The health care right, this is definitely a part of the health care right as far as this go. But again, I will wait and see what the United States Congress and the Supreme Court does on itself.
Mr. Parker?
Even a woman's right to choose. I absolutely do. But my thing is, let's not make it a habit. You know, I think there should be a limit on how many abortions one can have. I honestly do, because I wouldn't like hearing about a woman had 10 abortions. Why? What's the need for that? And not only that, if you give that much leeway, will that invite sexually transmitted diseases? You know, so I think there should be some type of, understanding of putting a cap on how many abortions one can have. Like, okay, if it's a situation where you're raped and you don't want to have it, I understand those type of things. But if you're someone out who is just getting pregnant time after time, and you're just killing these babies, I'm not in agreement with that. And I'd like to thank my mom. Thank you, Mom. I love you. Thank you for not killing me or aborting me, or I wouldn't be standing or sitting here running for Congress. I love you, Mom.
Moving on to our next question is something that has been touched a little bit on tonight. What is your stance on federal marijuana legalization or decriminalization? Starting off with Mr. Parker.
My standpoint is we do need to decriminalize recreational use of marijuana. I also think that it's important as we decriminalize that we educate the people the difference, because there's differences between different strands of marijuana. There's indica, there's sativa, and some may work well with one person and not with the other person. You know, one is a downer, one is an upper, and we need to educate these people on that. And not only that, I think as we open the door for recreational use, let's get some funding out to people of color so they can open up their own dispensaries locally. I don't know how many, I've seen all these dispensaries popping up, but I don't know how many are ran by people of color, and that's a problem.
Mr. Irwin, you're next.
I support the decriminalization of marijuana at the federal level.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah. Decriminalizing marijuana is extremely important, and Congress should do it. Preempt any and all state laws that currently have those laws. The war on drugs is, very much central to this problem back in the 80s and 90s, and we're still feeling the effects of that. But we also need to do more than that. It's not just about decriminalizing; it's also expunging past records, including arrest records, where people are still affected by the collateral consequences of even just being arrested for marijuana possession, for example. And we also need to commute sentences. Those who are currently affected and incarcerated as a result of these unjust laws. That's very important. And then secondly, the business opportunity. There is an incredible business opportunity here to create wealth and spread that wealth equitably across class and race in the United States. And we need to ensure that the federal government plays a role in subsidizing those businesses and those company opportunities. And I look forward to being in Congress and being someone to help shepherd both aspects of this, the criminal justice aspect, but also the business aspect of decriminalizing marijuana. Thank you.
Ms. Lee, you're next.
Yes, it's 2022. It is time that we remedy the harms caused by the war on drugs. Harms, of course, that disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities and poor folks, right? As we must move on decriminalization, legalization of marijuana, but also it needs to come with a recognition of those harms that were caused and a plan to make whole these communities, right? Millions of Black and Brown folks were impacted, not just through incarceration, but through our communities as they were drained of our family members, our loved ones, our neighbors. Right now, we are seeing as businesses are being created from this, right? I agree with the need to ensure that Black and Brown folks, small growers and businesses are able to get into this market, right, and not be pushed out by big corporations. That is important that we are expunging the records of all of the folks who were incarcerated through this. So yes.
And lastly, Mr. Woodard.
Yes, I believe in decriminalization of marijuana. At the present time, I also have an LLC, which is called Pennsylvania Expungements and Pardons. And the number one problem is that we see in the community is a lot of people who have backgrounds who've been arrested because they had a joint blunt. And this now has them having a record with a misdemeanor conviction on their record. It's also affect them when they go to college and get ready to go off to school. If you have a conviction of marijuana on your record and it's an M2, you cannot get federal funding. So definitely decriminalization on a federal level. And then at the same time, I believe it should also be Pennsylvania, we at the present time have it as just Pennsylvania medical, not recreational. All the surrounding states have it as recreational, and they make millions of dollars. We're the last one still behind times with West Virginia, Ohio, and all the surrounding states. So I believe that we should move towards decriminalization on a federal level and a state level.
Thank you very much. As we are moving right along to question 11, which is LGBTQ rights. So what steps, if any, should Congress take at the national level to protect LGBTQ rights, and should they include education reforms? And Mr. Woodard, we'll go back to you.
Yes, I believe that we should include educational reforms. Anything that's going on right now at the present time we see in school problems with students right now joining sports teams because they had a sex change and now they went from male to female or female to male, and they're not allowed to participate in sports. So each one of the states at the present time is having their own laws, but I believe it's something that the federal government should set for the entire United States, protect their rights.
Mr. Parker?
I believe it's time to protect people. I mean, I don't understand why this is a topic and why people don't understand that there are people who identify themselves as however they choose. I think that the federal government should offer aid to them, offer and educate the people. So I think that's just all it is. I think it's people are miseducated, and that's all we really can do. You know, we can just, I guess, educate them and put them in more situations where there are people who identify themselves differently, and put them in a room, let them learn from each other, let them grow together. We need just more experiences with one another so we could really value each other's difference.
All right, thank you, Mr. Parker. And now we'll go to Mr. Irwin.
Yeah, in my work with the Anti-Defamation League, where I'm an associate national commissioner, and on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, where I'm the chair for Pennsylvania, we have fought against discrimination in all forms, but those protections in employment, in housing, need to be extended to members of the LGBTQ community. We've found that the discrimination the incidence of discrimination is much greater for these people and these individuals, and it's got to end. Also, the right to marry someone you love, regardless of their LGBTQ status, should be put into law, into statute, so it's codified once and for all.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. And now Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, the LGBTQI rights and movement is part of the long arc of the civil rights movement from the 1950s and 1960s, and still today we are fighting that fight. And there's a long way to go, but there's a lot that still can be done, and there's still a lot that needs to be done. And a number of things I want to point out here. As a civil rights lawyer, I've dealt with this under federal law, under the Federal Fair Housing Act. There is no direct express protection for discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. That still has not been amended, and Congress needs to do that as soon as possible. You could still be discriminated against by a private landlord, for example, if you are gay or lesbian, trans, or queer, based off of those. And so as a result, we do need to be able to amend those statutes. Workplace discrimination, still a problem. If you're trans or queer, you still can be discriminated against. You can lose your job. You can be fired under federal law as a result of that. So we need to amend that as well. And those are some of the things that really need to be done as soon as possible, because if we don't, we're going to continue to see quite a bit of discrimination in our neighborhoods and in our community, and that's not who we are. So thank you.
And finally, Ms. Lee.
Yes, we're seeing a concerted, a coordinated national effort by the GOP to target and attack the LGBTQIA community, particularly the trans community, and those folks who are most impacted are going to be Black and brown trans folks. At the federal level, yes, they can be legally discriminated against in housing and in the workforce. Pennsylvania is one of those states where they can be discriminated here at the state level, depending on what county you're in, depending on what city you find yourself in. We have not codified protections for them yet at the state or the federal level. We must move at that at the federal level right now. And I just want to say that today, for instance, and how dangerous this is, that today, for instance, we debated for over an hour anti-trans bill that would attack children who are just attempting to play their sports. This is an effort to make these folks a target, to make our community members, our loved ones, feel unwelcome and unsafe. And we have to call that out, and we have to fight it at every single level, everywhere that we see it.
Moving on to our next question, it's going to deal with climate change. What steps, if any, should Congress take to address climate change, and should they include measures such as limiting fracking on natural gas? We're going to start with Ms. Lee.
Yes. We have a climate crisis. It is the existential crisis facing us in this generation, and we have limited time to act. I believe that the federal government, that Congress must move on a Green New Deal, that we must move to 100% clean and renewable energy, right? It is going to be a lift, of course, but it will create millions of good union jobs, right? It will get us in our climate together, right? And I believe that it's something that we need bold leadership on right now. We're told that there is a false choice, that you can either have good jobs or that you can have clean air and clean water. And we know that that's not true. In the Mon Valley, for instance, we are one of the communities that had a fracking proposal. Everywhere where we knocked throughout this district, we found people who did not want that, who understood that it was dangerous, that it was unsafe in our communities, and we fought back against it. And we were able to defeat that fracking proposal. We need to ban fracking. We need to this timer. Man.
Mr. Woodard.
My belief inside is fracking and everything. I wanted to wait until we get into Congress and see what's going on at the present time. It's one thing to say what you believe right off the bat unless you know the topic, and then I want to read up more on the topic of fracking.
Mr. Parker.
I believe that, we are in a climate crisis. But I also believe that, in our environments, you're more likely to see someone who dies by a gun than a mission gas. We got people dying daily out here. So, yes, I'm in favor of, climate proposals. I hear a lot of times people say the Green New Deal, but I'm here to say, what about the Black New Deal? What about the Black New Deal? Because that's who's dying in our street. These gases that are out here polluting the air, yes, we understand that. And I don't know if I'll be able to go in there and make a difference on that, except for advocate. But within 2 years, I'm focused on this funding. I'm focused on making sure people are getting investments so they can probably work on things like electric cars, electric charging stations, and stuff like that. Let's not worry about the legislation. Let's see what we can do in the meantime.
Mr. Irwin, you're next.
The climate crisis is the greatest, one of the two greatest challenges that we as Earthlings face. And we've got to, I agree with the president's plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We've got to do it as fast as we possibly can. Natural gas is part of that transition. We shouldn't be fracking in people's backyards, and we have to enforce our environmental laws stringently to make sure that people comply and we take care of the health, especially the environmental justice issues surrounding that. As chair of Sustainable Pittsburgh here in Pittsburgh, and as when I was in Congress working to end oil and gas drilling underneath the Allegheny forest, I've always supported moving toward a greener economy. But we have to make sure we take care of people, the people in the Mon Valley and the people in this region who need jobs to provide for themselves and their families, and give them the opportunity for rewarding and satisfying lives. But we need to be able to eat, breathe the air, and we need to be able to drink the water. We have to get Build Back Better passed, which will help move us in that direction. Finally, we have to think about...
Mr. Irwin, I am sorry, but we do have to move on to Mr. Dickinson.
Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, climate change is a major problem that we're all facing. And right here in southwestern Pennsylvania, we have the 8th worst air quality in all the United States, right here. And every day that my wife and I go out to walk with our daughters, my wife checks the air quality to see whether it's safe to go out. And that's not the world we should be living in. Why? Because that gives rise to respiratory diseases and asthma. This is affecting our children and grandchildren. So there's a lot that needs to be done. One is that I am a supporter of the Green New Deal. We need to move to a carbon-free economy by 2030, 2040 as soon as possible. Congress needs to pass legislation that bans subsidies going to big fossil fuel companies. Why? Because we can't keep feeding a valve for pollution to continue throughout the United States. We need to cut off those subsidies. We need to have a jobs transition transition so that we go from fossil fuel industries and move into solar and wind. Families who are affected and workers who are affected by that have a guaranteed job along the way and have a union job as well. That's a very important part of this. And then lastly, we need to have politicians stop taking big money from big corporations such as the oil and gas industries. That's very important. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Oh, and also for the record, we are running out of time, so we will have two final questions until you all can get to your closing statements. So our second to last question will be on automation. So as computers with artificial intelligence increasingly take over jobs that were once employed by humans, what support should the federal government provide to protect and educate workers? And we are going to start with Mr. Dickinson.
Automation certainly has become a bit of a problem for a significant number of people across the United States as a result of jobs being lost. But of course, for businesses, that tends to be a boon to their profit making, and that's somewhat of a problem. So we need to be cognizant of automation, what kind of detrimental impact it's going to have. We also need to be in a position that we are providing subsidies and resources at the local level to provide for jobs and job training as well to deal with the automation issue. And I look forward to being in Congress and working on a certain number of committees to study this issue. I don't think it's been studied enough, and as a result, we need to know and understand all the evidence, the clear and convincing evidence of the impact of automation, and then move forward with regulations and other issues to address the problem. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Ms. Lee, you are next.
One of the, I would say, biggest issues that we're facing, especially coming up off of our environmental question, is what do our future economies look like, and how are we adapting, adjusting to them? Automation is one of those issues that, of course, poses a threat to jobs, to union jobs, but it's also a consideration that gets to the quality of life that folks have. When I think about the federal government and what our role is in that, is recognizing that there are some things that are inevitable, but there are steps that we can take to ensure that folks are not being left behind, that workers are not being left behind. I think about our wages, of course. I think about healthcare for all, so that folks are not reliant, of course, upon their employer for their jobs. As we transition through economies, I think about job training and making sure that we are investing in that. So folks are trained in the new jobs and the future jobs, those renewable and green jobs. Those are all steps that we have to take around automation, and we also have to have open conversation about it, about the effects of it and how it will affect the workforce. But we have to confront it head on.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And Mr. Woodard, you're next.
This question, please.
Oh, sure. So it's about automation. As computers with artificial intelligence increasingly take over jobs that were once employed by humans, what support do you think the federal government should do to protect and educate workers?
My number one thing is supporting the people in the community and making sure that they are highly educated. Again, with part of the education with Pennsylvania College Access Program, we want to make sure all people get an education, and especially if it's going to be affected as far as companies bringing in automations to take away the jobs from people. I'm strongly in favor of funding for those companies.
Mr. Parker.
I believe that the times are changing and we need to change with the times, but I do believe that it's all about balance, and it's also about equal opportunities. Of course people are going to be in fear of losing their jobs, but let's prepare them for the next step. Let's prepare them to become the entrepreneur. Let's prepare them to learn how to automate their systems. Let's prepare them to take advantage of all this technology that's out here. There's a place right on the north side. It's called Innovation Works. I don't know if anyone knows about it, but they invest in people. I want everyone to go over there and apply. They give out $100,000 investments. It's right on the north side. It's basically, they operate like a Shark Tank. And I mean this. I want everybody, if you know somebody who has an idea for automation, AI, artificial intelligence, go check them out, go apply, get some of this funding so you can help provide other jobs when the other ones are lost.
And Mr. Irwin.
We have to make sure that, first of all, the automation, what's happening now, is not replacing people, but enabling people to do more with what they're doing, assisting them to achieve higher levels of efficiency and get more done. We're heading in this direction, but we're right in the center of where these robots are being made. And Howie Choset, who was in this race and got out, who's a robotics brilliant robotic scientist at Carnegie Mellon University, has endorsed me in helping, and we're working together to provide for internships and opportunities for people to learn how to help build these robots. And when I get to Congress, I'm going to continue the work that I've been doing to try to bring the Global Manufacturing Industrialization Summit to Pittsburgh, so that we can be part of the thinking about how we transition. And there are going to be people who are going to absorb much of this transition, and we have to be able to take care of those folks as they get older. But younger folk, giving them STEM training and bring them along the way, make sure that this entire region will benefit as we move toward this assisted automation.
For our final question of tonight, it's going to deal with the political division in our country. What specific steps would you take as a Democrat in Congress to work with your Republican counterparts? We're going to start with Mr. Irwin.
Well, we don't have to work with all the Republicans. We just have to work with a few of them to get over into the majority, so we can start to get some things done in Congress and make a difference in people's lives. I'm somebody who believes that we have to plant our flag, and we have to sometimes we have to make adjustments and not accept the whole loaf, but we have to move forward. We have to make progress, and I think I'm going to do that by building trust with my colleagues. They'll see the expertise that I've developed over the course of my career. I have knowledge in many different areas, and I'll gain their respect and the ability to be part of that conversation. It's absolutely important that we find a way to work together and move this country forward, because people are living paycheck to paycheck, trying to take care of their kids and their parents and themselves and just pursue their passions. And the federal government has to be part of that. We have to do things that matter, and that's what I'm going to do when I get to Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Yes. Look, Congress is gridlocked, and there's a lot of controversy between the two parties. But I'm a bridge builder and a coalition builder, and I think in large part because of my background growing up in a multiracial foster home with white kids and black kids, and growing up in a very unique environment with many, many children. And as a result of that, I've learned how to listen to the other side. And we're not going to agree on everything. Definitely not. But I think it's important that we reach across the aisle, have a conversation, and come to an agreement on many of the issues that are affecting many of us. Now, there are going to be many Republicans who may not want to do that, but there are enough in Congress to be able to get things done. I think that's incredibly important. And, I do have that background, even as a listener, as someone as a law professor who understands these issues, who's willing to sit down and have conversations. We've seen it with this campaign and meeting with a broad spectrum of ideological interests. And I believe that when I'm in Congress, I'm going to be able to do that and bridge the divide and get things done. And that's important. Delivering for the people of this region is going to be extremely important. I think I'm best fit to do that. So thank you.
You're next.
We have so much at stake right now, and we are facing so many crises, and it's important that we identify, what are our roadblocks to them. And the reality is that in our racial justice crises and the response to COVID-19 and our environmental crisis and our threats to democracy, we're facing a common denominator. And I'm going to be the one to say it. That common denominator is the Republican Party. And as a legislator, where I've been in Harrisburg for the last 4 years, I've had to work with some of the folks who are among the most difficult. And I will tell you that more often than people believe, we work together. We work together across so many different topics, local government and state government issues. We work together, believe it or not, even on some labor issues here and there. We work together on naming bridges. But when it comes down to people's basic humanity, when it comes down to rights for queer and trans people, for Black and brown people, for poor people, for disabled people, there's not an agreement there because those folks are working against us. And I believe that it's important that when we see people, when people show us who they are, that we believe them. And the reality is that the best thing that we can do is to show and say who they are and to organize and build coalitions on the outside so that we can expand the electorate to win back those seats and get rid of them.
Thank you. Mr. Woodard?
I'm easy to work with, very easy. I don't care if you're black or white. Coming from a family of 21 kids, if you can't work with that, you can't work with anyone. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, black or white, I am there to help and work with everyone. The main concern is working with the constituents and what they want and what needs to be done. And that's basically what I'm going to do in Congress.
Finally, Mr. Parker?
I believe that, I'm all about bringing people together. I think we need to meet in the middle. And you know, I believe that there are several common interests that we all share. You know, like every day when I go outside, it isn't just about Democrats or Republicans. It's about black, white. It's about male or female. And I have to make these relationships. And I'm prepared. I have made these relationships, and I'm prepared to keep making these relationships. And not only when I get to Congress, but it's about right now, because when I win this primary election, I have to build relationships with Republicans to win in a general election. That's what's important. And they need to see someone like myself who doesn't get caught up in all the political rhetoric that just pulls me all the way to the left. We need to meet in the middle. There's so many issues that we share a common interest on, and the ones that we don't, you know, I believe that there's a compromise that could be made. But, you know, I'm a people person. I want to work with people.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so thank you so much for answering all of our questions. And we are going to move on to our closing statements and timers. We do ask that you put 2 minutes on the clock, except for when I think 2 seconds, you wouldn't have been able to get out of a word, would you? So 2 minutes on the clock, please. Thank you very much. And we are going to start with Mr. Parker.
Come on.
Yeah.
Thank you all for taking the time out to just sit here and come to this forum. I'm really thankful for the League of Women Voters in Point State Park for hosting this forum. You know, I'm doing the work now. I'm an African-American male. I'm right across the bridge, North Side. My uncle was Willie Stargell. I just left from the Pirates home opener. You know, I have a heart, just like everybody in here, that beats. You know, I love. There's not hate. I don't walk outside angry or hating people. I want to work, and I want to work for your family. I want to work for your kids. I want to work for their futures and everybody's future in here. We all have a place somewhere in this world. It's about who's going to break down those barriers so we can be where we belong. And I believe that I'm the guy. I'm doing the work right now. As you mentioned, infrastructure. I'm the only candidate that I know of that has reached out to Cheryl Mooney, who's in control of this project with PennDOT. I contacted her directly right after that Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed because I wanted to make sure that this bridge was rebuilt by all of us. You know, there's a lot of equity in it. And that's what's important to me. Not leaving people out, but including them. Inclusion is the key. Why not? You know, if somebody could create something, if somebody in here was suffering from an illness, would you not want the cure for that illness because a black person made it? No, you would want that. You would want that for your family so they can live. And that's what I'm here for. Want me for your family so we can live, so our next generations can live. I'm doing the work. Like I said, I don't know if I'm going to be there 4 years, 6 years, but I'm focused on the next 2 years. What we can do with the next 2 years, and that is take advantage of this infrastructure funding. There's $1.7 trillion, and I think, and I know that I can distribute that equitably. And that is the goal. That's the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. And we are going to move on to Mr. Irwin, your final statement.
So I want to thank our hosts tonight, Point Park, the League of Women Voters, my fellow candidates, and the people of this 12th Congressional District. This election is about one thing. How do we help President Biden make progress for Western Pennsylvania families? And I think the way to do that is to actually work with this president to get things done, to stand up to the bullies in the Republican Party and get results, from child care to infrastructure to lowering the cost of medicine and food and gas. My entire life has been about getting results, from working to bring light rail transit and transportation infrastructure to Pittsburgh, to protecting consumers and seniors from Wall Street abuse. That's why I've been endorsed by our retiring Congressman, Mike Doyle, and by former County Councilwoman Brenda Frazier, former Governor Ed Rendell, our County Executive Rich Fitzgerald, by the Allegheny County Democratic Party and labor unions. I'm honored to have their support. I'd be humbled to have yours, because in these times, we need a neighborhood congressperson who delivers for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. So, Mr. Dickinson, you are next. Your final statement. Mr. Dickinson, if you were able to hear us, you are next if you can go. Mr. Dickinson, can you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay, so it seems like Mr. Dickinson's having some technical difficulties, so Miss Lee, we're going to move on to you.
This is what happens when you don't show up.
All right, we're going to move on to Mr. Jerry Dickinson for your final statement.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you to the hosts for this wonderful event. I truly do appreciate it. Statistically speaking, I probably shouldn't be here today. I came out of the foster care system at a very early age, landed in a large multiracial foster home with 11 children altogether. And we've been through everything, whether it be addiction, homelessness, joblessness, incarceration, and a number of other matters. But I made it out okay. I worked hard. I became a Fulbright scholar to Johannesburg, South Africa, a civil rights lawyer, and a constitutional law professor at the University of Pittsburgh at just the age of 32. And now when I'm looking at the world that my two young daughters are growing up in, I'm concerned about the fact that they're growing up in a world where we had January 6th, the insurrection, or they're growing up in a world with climate change and rising sea levels and wildfires, or growing up in a world of Pittsburgh where this is the least liberal region for African-American women. This is what has caused me to work as a civil rights lawyer and defend tenants in eviction proceedings, do fair housing work on behalf of the disabled and the elderly, go to Johannesburg, South Africa to represent squatters in the slums of Joburg, and to conduct police reform here in Pittsburgh, to fight on behalf of those who have less than, to fight on behalf of those who are treated as less than, because that is who I am. I am not a career politician. I'm not running for two offices like Representative Lee. I don't work at a corporate law firm like Mr. Irwin, who's a union-busting job. I'm not doing those things. I am a person who's stepping away from my career as a law professor to go down to Congress to work on behalf of generations of children and those who are coming after us to make sure we have a better world. And that's what we need right now. Not career politicians, not folks who've been in government for decades on end, but people who are coming fresh out of different perspectives and can bring a difference to this region. I look forward to representing this region in 2023. Thank you so much.
Miss Lee, you can go next.
Yes, thank you all so much for this evening, to the other folks in this race for joining us today. We are facing a critical moment in our nation's history. We're at a crossroads in very many ways. We're facing crises, environmental and racial, economic injustice, threats to our democracy. And I believe that we have a need for not just fresh perspective, but people who are going to come in with a proven track record of fighting, of organizing, and of expanding the electorate and empowering new people. Since I was elected in 2018, and actually quite well before, I've been committed to not just getting and keeping myself elected, but I've spent my time building coalition and movements that we will need to truly win on all of these progressive issues that we are fighting for by transforming the electoral landscape in this region. Instead of gatekeeping in the traditional establishment ways, I've been committed to tearing down gates through my PAC, Unite, through coalition building and my organizing. I've helped to get dozens of progressive grassroots candidates elected at all levels of governments, from county councils and borough councils to magistrates and judges. I have, since 2018, as a college student at Penn State, standing on street corners, registering voters, to my time in 2016 working for the Democratic Party for the general election, to my own election. I have talked to thousands and thousands of voters, and voters of all racial backgrounds and genders, economic statuses and religions, urban and suburban voters. And it is clear, something is clear, that these voters recognize that there is something that is fundamentally broken about our system. And they aren't looking for people who are going to continue the status quo, who are going to offer a continuity service, but they're looking for people who are going to fight unapologetically for working class values, for poor and working people, for healthcare for all, for environmental justice and racial justice. That's what we have been doing, and that's what we have been building. On May 17th, we have an opportunity to put in a proven fighter, somebody who is committed to going in and fighting for us with everything that I have. We cannot back down right now. We cannot turn back. But this is our opportunity to get elected somebody who is from a reflective democracy and more reflective of our democracy that we have not seen. We can make history on May 17th.
Is this thing on now?
Mr. Woodard.
Thank you. I want to thank Point Park University and also the League of Women Voters. Coming back home here to Point Park is a pleasure. I also want to tell everyone, who do you want to go to Washington and fight for you? Not sell out, not flip-flop, and not to quit. Who do you want to go to Washington to fight for our community and our residents on education, inflation, voting rights, the LGBTQ, and taxes? The answer is simple, me. I'm Jeff Woodard, and I'm your candidate. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause to our candidates. And that concludes our program for tonight.
And we cannot go without thanking our entire crew for helping us out here tonight, including our staff behind the scenes that has worked so hard trying to get this event together for the past 2 months, including Nicholas Konopka, Alexis Bonifed, Frank Smith, Noah Marshallek, and also our professor and our director, Dr. Andy Conti.
We would also like to thank our friends at the League of Women Voters for all their help guiding us through this experience. We truly could not have done it without you guys. A big thanks to Judy Clack and Maureen Gosider.
And we cannot thank our CMI production crew of Olivia Vallow, Wayne Gaines, Tanner Knapp, Casey Houlihan, Tara Myers, and everybody that we missed. We've been working hard around 11 o'clock this morning trying to get this event together, so we cannot thank you all enough.
Thank you to the candidates and the campaigns for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it, and good luck in your campaigns.